Good evening, everyone. How you doing tonight? Welcome to the North Carolina Cryptid and Paranormal Project. My name is Tom, and I'm the host of this show. I'm glad to have a good guest on tonight. His name is Dan A. Nedrelo, and he's been doing this for quite some time, and I have the pleasure of getting to interview him tonight. So, without further ado, let's bring him on. And as the internet connection wasn't working so great, so we're going to be doing a phone interview. So that's the best we can get to make it happen. So here we go.
Howdy doody.
Hey,
glad to make the connection, Tom.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you tonight, buddy. So, what are you into? I know you do research. You into artwork. You kind of go to some conventions. Or just tell everyone kind of everything that you're into at this moment, and then we can kind of get into like your history.
Sure, you bet. First off, I'm a biologist associated with the Ozark Mountain Sasquatch group. That happens to be Shane Carpenter and Randy Harrington, and then we have Gary Schutte. And we've got some activity going on with that in the Ozarks next month. Now, as far as what I'm doing, I'm interested in Sasquatch behavior, Sasquatch phenotypes or physical characteristics, distribution, ecology, all the natural history aspects of them from a biologist standpoint, which is what I am. I like to flip every rock I can, so I'm interested in networking with everybody. I understand that not everybody's take is the same. I understand that different people have different beliefs, but what I'm interested in is physical characteristics of secondary field behavior or field I lost it. In other words, secondary field characters that we, evidence, whether it's footprints or whether it's hair or whether it's signature carcass kills or paths or tracks or some sort of manipulations. Maybe they tore a fence down, maybe they smashed a tree, all those good things. So anything associated with the target species really interests me. Has for a long time, and I got started when I was a kid. So.
Wow. That's pretty interesting, and I know what you mean about I haven't really seen a whole lot of carcass kills, but what I have seen a lot is like the tree structures, the bends, the breaks, the X's, the little glyphs of things, and how they take things and make them look like it could be some kind of language. The way they take the little sticks and twigs and form them into a way where it's almost woven, but it looks like it could be like maybe a sentence or some kind of meaning to it. But I couldn't tell you what it means because I don't know enough of what to see similarities and patterns to kind of project it into some kind of language or some kind of translation. So have you gotten anything like that? Like, have you been able to do any kind of translation to figure out what they could possibly mean? Or
I'm not the one to talk to about that. Just the idea that it's associated with the target species is a jump for a lot of people, as we know. I've had some unusual things happen. I've had friends that have had some unusual things happen. A lot of people won't talk about it. Some people will. Mm-hmm. Some people probably mistake things that really aren't even associated, and others might hit something right on the head. I guess the information is so fractional, although it's growing, but the verification aspect is what trips a lot of people. So I'm interested in all those things. And as far as what's happened to me, I've had some designs and things like that happen. Actually, I've got a private property I've monitored for 12 years, and this last few years, I've been putting pennies out on tile and watching rocks being moved, and big obvious things too, where moss rocks are being brought up from the stream and laid on a rock wall. But it's interesting because actually I was in Ohio last year, and I haven't really mentioned this to hardly anybody. The last day I was here last year, or in Ohio, I had a campsite, and what was interesting was I had taken all the tinder. I had planned to do a fire, but I was so tired I just didn't. I just wanted to sleep in the tent. And when I got up in the morning, there were little designs made out of that tinder all over the place.
Really?
And the ground wasn't specifically spectacular enough to make tracks, I guess. Or I have no explanation for that whatsoever, but that was really interesting. And I've got other similar situations with other people, but also, like, for example, the presence of I've got a friend, and she showed me a tussock in the marsh, which is made of moss, and she would have a skull, and she would put that down, and then it would be put up on a branch, and then she'd put it back down, and then it would go back up on the branch. We've had different things like that happen, but as far as the specifics on the glyphs, I do know that in the study area that we're working with, I called it 400 in the Ozarks, the landowner had some structures up here, but he had tapping on the window and physical presence. He got visuals, and so there was an association with the structures in them. Also, I was working with a gal named Donna over in Wisconsin, not terribly far from the Kettle Moraine, and we had structures there that were apparently put up by something interesting. And regarding structures, last year, a good buddy of mine went out to photograph wild orchids in Wisconsin, in the central part of the state. And what was interesting was he had laid down to photograph these flowers. I came in and laid down to photograph the flowers. He was so excited about it, he went back the next day and photographed them. And he liked it so well, he returned for a third day. And when he did, there were tree branches stuck on the ground over the areas where he had photographed these flowers. And he just couldn't believe it. And it was interesting because the first time I was there, I saw some sticks leaned up against a tree that looked, that's interesting. You wouldn't think people would get up into this part of the woods, but they easily could. So who knows? Going on down the road with this, I started looking around and I found some asterisks and some interesting designs that would challenge whether or not nature did it. But the idea that these structures are placed right over where he had photographed the flowers really made it interesting. Now, I haven't visited the place this year, but he did with another photographer. And two interesting things. One, they heard what appeared to be something as large as a horse in the forest, not far from them. And then as they went around a corner in the path, here was a fresh snap tree for virtually no reason with a 5-inch diameter. So we do have black bear in the area, and most people would probably point to that. But that wouldn't explain why we had these interesting designs with branches and sticks over where the flowers are photographed. How's that?
That's pretty interesting with the flowers and the tree branches around it. I mean, that's something you don't really hear about that too often. That's something that has to have physical thumbs and hands and fingers to be able to move things like that and place them in
there was some interweaving and some things like that. So, I mean, can people do that? Sure.
Yeah.
Would they? I don't know. But that doesn't explain the snap tree, and it doesn't explain some of the other things that we've encountered, So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense too, where certain things, attribute to certain behaviors of just the patterns of what they do, based on so many encounters or people experiencing these things. It just kind of goes hand in hand.
Sure. Well, I've had some experiences that I simply can't understand or explain. And, whether it's vocalizations like whistles, or whether it's slapping of vehicles, or whether it's, in one case, I was in Georgia at a site that people have had visuals. And after speaking with the host, I ended up going back to the car, and here a 2-foot branch was laying right up over my car. That wasn't there before. And then looking down on the cooler, which I had out, there were 2 species of oak leaves placed symmetrically right on top of the cooler. So that was fun.
That's pretty. That's pretty awesome with the cooler. I've never had anything like that happen.
I found one tree, but I couldn't find the other tree. But it doesn't mean it wasn't right there, but I was looking around, I couldn't find it. So that's interesting. And then that night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I got one hellacious slap on top of my Yukon, and I was quite pleased with that. I was very happy. I was hoping for a face, and I was just laying there looking. And if they did look in, it would probably be on the other side. So I didn't get to see anything that night, but there were some good vocalization sounds from the slap on the top of the vehicle. And actually, a good friend of mine just had that happen in Idaho not too long ago, and she got a few finger ditches or finger marks on her window. And before she, after she actually left the area, and then she came back, and here were 2 rocks placed on her fender. That night, her Jeep was shaking a little bit. So
I was going to ask that if it was shaking at all or anything like that. It's pretty interesting.
My Yukon wasn't, but there was an example where we actually got some evidence alongside the the rocks being put there. Plus, she mentioned that there was like dead silence there, so she kind of had to suspect that there was probably going to be some activity. On the 400, we get repetitious things happening, and I'd be glad to tell you a little bit about that too. But why don't you go ahead and guide me and give me some ideas or questions, and I can kind of fill you in on. I've been doing this about 25 years, and I'm trying to flip every rock.
Yeah. So what year did you start doing this, and what kind of made you want to get into it?
Oh, now you're going to tag me. I was in 5th grade.
Okay.
And my teacher, Mrs. Weber, God bless her, said the words "abominable snowman." That started the adventure. I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. I'm a herpetologist. That's my gravy, but mammals are my second thing, and birds right behind that. And so vertebrate zoology with fish is my strength. And but primates always fascinated me, and especially the big gorillas and zoos and such. And I went right away to the encyclopedias and started reading about Shipton and the Yeti and the axe picture with the big wide, double splayed toes up front. And I got excited about that, knowing that there's still things on Earth that we haven't discovered. And then it wasn't long before here's the Patty news coming out. And so right away, I'm like, I don't have to go to the Himalayas. I can work in the United States, because apparently some adults think that is real. I don't know any adults that are thinking it's real, but some do, and I'd like to know why. That's what fueled the whole thing.
That's pretty awesome. I'm kind of on the same boat. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and there was a certain book in the library that everyone was interested in, and had the abominable snowman, the Yeti, the pictures of the Yeti scalp from Tibet on the expedition.
Had to be, Ivan Sanderson, I'm guessing.
Yep.
Yeah, that was my Bible for a long time.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff, and I was I was drawn into it from a young age as well. And then I had experiences in Canada, bear hunting, and it kind of just grew from there after that. But
wow.
So when was your first encounter?
Not long after. I was in 7th grade. Now, I didn't get a visual, but the behavioral sequences prompted me to go on and get a degree in wildlife biology. Vertebrate zoology is technically what my focus was, but I took a number of wildlife classes, and I was surrounded by wildlife people, and ended up taking wildlife jobs and being a wildlife biologist. So, long story short, in 7th grade, we were at a church camp in northern Wisconsin. There was a pine woods, and we had about 25 campers there with us that particular night on that journey, and everybody had a flashlight. And we started getting some extremely loud hissing, and it was like what I would call a bull pine or gopher snake, genus Pituophis, and it was just. But it was so loud, it was unbelievable, and it was associated with splashes in the water behind the vegetation. And I'm left with, what is that? Well, at the time, I'm assuming it's almost got to be a bear, and but it never came out. It was not going to be seen. Mm-hmm. Nobody saw it. And then pretty soon it quit and it was disregarded. And I took that with me. I just couldn't let it go. And I found out later that some other people have vocals just like it, and they've had the visuals of what made that call. So going through college, I couldn't find another adult to talk with about this. So I was in total silence all through middle school, high school. In scouts, I had some scouts that were interested in what I'd read, so I kind of did campfire stories with that. Okay. And then after that, I was in 4-H, and I was in scouts, and that allowed me to, bring rattlesnakes in and share information on wildlife, and one thing led to another, and I ended up doing that in college. And I think I met one adult who actually had an experience, and that was a gal from California. That was in my speech class in college. That was the first person that I ran into that took it serious. So I was very glad to meet her. And then, again, nothing happened until I was in my 20s. Everybody just laughed at the subject matter. And I was working for a private zoo in Missouri and felt very, very uncomfortable at the old zoo where I was staying. And it seemed as though I was being watched. I knew I had gray fox there, and I knew I had numerous other animals, but I never found any footprints or tracks. And after that job, I had numerous other biologist positions and worked for the National Wildlife Federation in North Carolina for 2 field seasons. Never found any field evidence whatsoever. At that time, I didn't believe there was any forest manipulations or anything like that.
Right.
I know that many people still don't, and I completely understand that. But boy, when you start finding tracks near these things and finding other things, but if people can do it, then I understand the thinking.
What part of North Carolina was it that you were?
Hendersonville, over by Black Mountain on the west side, in the mountains.
Okay.
I lived there for 2 years in the field seasons.
Yeah, that's up north in the mountains. I'm surprised you didn't have any activity. I mean, all the areas up near the mountains. I mean, even in the areas down by me. I mean, now it's active. Maybe back then it wasn't as active. But
right. I used to hunt rattlesnakes myself. I'd do as many as 10 river buffs a day up and down these hillsides. They weren't very big, but 700 feet up in the air and, above sea level. And, I was in brush, just heavy brush, and going through xanthus xylem or prickly pear ash or prickly ash and trying to work your way up through into the bluff area where you get the goat prairies or the vertical prairies where the rattlers were. And so there were times when I felt watched, but I never got a vocalization that I deemed unusual, and I never had a visual of anything. I know it's funny because one of the snake hunting books, Carl Caulfield, out in the bluffs or mountains, actually, probably New York and then the Carolinas, so was Appalachians, he was pushed. He was actually pushed and hurt his leg. Never had an explanation for why he was pushed, and so that was about the only thing I had to go on, and I didn't see anything in Wisconsin until after I got out of the BFRO, which I entered. My mom passed away in 2000. My sister made a bet. I'll bet you don't become computer literate, and I'll bet you don't go, networking and researching these mountain giants. These giant, hairy giants, and didn't want my little sister to win that bet. So I ended up in the BFRO for 4 years, and that led to some interesting interactions and witness situations and going out of state and having a few experiences. But I still didn't get a visual during that time.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, I heard, I don't know how it is now, but I've heard, they have some good qualities. I also heard that they withheld evidence from certain witnesses because certain things pertain to change and generate a different narrative agenda of the Sasquatch, and they're not interested in that, but they're still a database, a formulated company or whatever you want to call them, a corporation that does, a large database across the country that helps people or eyewitnesses. So you got to give them credit for that. Nobody does things perfect.
Exactly.
So
right. Well, there's a lot of personalities, and my reason for leaving was quite personal, actually. But anyway, I had gone from 205 pounds to 255 pounds. My typing went from 35 words a minute to 105, and it was just wise for me to get out of the situation. There were other things going on politically that basically I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'd like to do it independently. So I did. And on one hand, I regret that because I left some really cool people behind, and on the other, I'm very happy that I did it, because now I can do pretty much what I need and want to do and not have to answer anybody.
That I was just gonna say, you can pretty much do your own, run your own show however you want it, and you don't have to answer nobody. You can stick with a certain, theory or ideology of what you think they are, and stick with it, and not have to listen to anyone else's. Well, I mean, still do throughout the community, but like you're not based on a certain standard, and you don't have to run with that standard. You can do your own. So I like that. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, this is nice because I can flip rocks and network with anybody and everybody that's willing to. Mm-hmm. And I think I can learn something from everybody, although it might not be what I want to learn, but incredible things from incredible people. And really, almost everybody is. I know we all have different takes. We might have 6 people in one place seeing the same thing, and you have 6 different versions of what happened. I like to know details, deeply based details, especially with phenotype. What do the eyes look like? How far wide apart were they? How far were you from seeing this? How long did you see it? What kind of lighting did you have? What kind of behaviors was associated with this? And what time? And what was going on with the moon? And what's going on with rain? And what's going on with the season? And all those things. And I don't want to grill somebody when I'm asking them these questions, but you almost have to if you're really going to get the detail, and not everybody's willing to put up with that. So sometimes you come away with just a certain portion of the available information you could have that often sinks, and we never get back as that person becomes disinterested or doesn't want to talk or et cetera. And I operate on trust, and if somebody doesn't want their name or somebody doesn't want their location, we certainly don't want to cause any riffraff with that. And as far as my concern is the well-being of the person I'm talking to and how I can be helpful, and then hopefully they can be helpful to me, so that as we all network, we can help each other.
That's pretty awesome to do that, to kind of willing to work with anybody and being open to all that. That's great stuff. I mean, and sharing things, certain things. I mean, obviously certain things you have to keep to yourself, but certain, sharing certain information or helping other researchers.
I was working with Randy Harrington and working with Shane Carpenter and Gary Schutte is just a blast. These are wonderful, awesome human beings that I'm very pleased to call my brothers. And I have been quite busy in other arenas, and so sometimes I can't employ the time it takes to do an incredible job, but it allows me to work with what we have. And for example, we have an individual with a 10-inch foot now, probably just a little over as he grows, and he punched perhaps almost 100 tracks. Last September, I was able to see some of the remnants of these tracks. And I actually sent a picture of myself looking at one to you. What was interesting was Shane and Randy coordinated probably about 35 cast tracks from this, which haven't been made available. We got together in Oklahoma last March, and Shane brought I think 7 of the tracks, like the best ones, and I probably took over 250 pictures of these tracks, trying to determine more about the longitudinal arches and medial arches and the different aspects and physical functions of the foot, the toes, spread, the flexibility of the foot, and there's so much we can learn. Mm-hmm. And we knew who made these tracks, so that helps. But the casual observer would probably just sweep them under the rug. No, that's human, man. You're wasting your time. So I think there's a lot of information out there that could be brought forward. And my focus this year is going to be more on human feet, so that I can learn our averages, our typical traits, and try to come up with some common denominators that help differentiate our feet from the juveniles of them. And there's some noticeable things, but if you just see partial tracks or they're not particularly good tracks, it's easy to dismiss them, especially if they're in a place where they're not far from public access, might be a park, it might be a beach, it might be any number of different things. But who made the tracks and when did they make the tracks are often things maybe people who don't take the time to differentiate.
Wow, that's the I was going to ask you about the footprints now. Do you see a lot of like abnormalities in the toe tracks, like maybe deformities or things that just don't add up to be like your typical human that you can kind of tell and pretty much pinpoint that that's definitely a Sasquatch?
I'm just not even the guy to ask that question because I've got such a limited situation. But down in the 400, the individuals we've been working with, they seem to be what we expect. I mean, there's a big male that hangs out. I don't know that he likes us too much. Randy and Shane would be the guys to talk to about what's happening with that lately. But as that's been observed, his tracks have been between 15 and 16 inches long. And we have a female there now, and she's, I believe, approximately 14 inches. Her foot is, if it's the same individual, her foot is standard that we'd expect. And the youngsters, we've got real good footage on. And it's interesting because 3 years ago, before the COVID thing, we had juvenile footprints, 2 10 inches, one a little bit larger than the other. And actually, my first trip to the 400 there, I drove many hours, over 10, to get there. And as I got there, the guys were like, well, you just drove. You probably want to go to bed. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's prime time. It's 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning. Let's do it. So we didn't walk too far before the thermal picked up a peeker. And, Bunny, what do we got? And the more we watched the behavior, it seemed like what we were looking for and what matched other things in the past. So Shane walked up on it, and he's talked about this in numerous podcasts, but he walked up on it, got quite close, 7 to 8 feet away, and this was one of the 10-inch track makers. And I'm in the process of finishing up a picture of how this looks, and it's Sibylla Irwin has some incredible images that she's done. She's got one out of Oklahoma that was being observed by 2 researchers, and she was able to get on the phone and talk to them, especially one fellow who was looking at it right when she was drawing it. So she was able to ask specific questions to get details, and he was able to look directly at the creature or the individual, the primitive man or the hairy man or whatever people like to go with, and put that on paper and bring it to life. And that was just absolutely fantastic, and that's very similar to the one that Shane had seen. And what was interesting about that incident was I didn't know either man very well at that time in 2019. So Randy's pretty aggressive about, geez, man, don't go do that. And Shane's like, no, I'm going in. I'm going to need you guys to guide me. So just, and off he went, and he got 7 to 8 feet away. And one of the things that happened was we had, he got in close, and then he turned, gave some time, and he went back. And the time he went back, I understand there was some tooth clacking, and there was a rock thrown, whether by the other sibling or the mother, I don't know. And then came back, we all high-fived, and then we just hoofed it back to the camp, hoping that we didn't interfere with natural progressions as they would come into camp and interact and do things. Luckily, that night they came into camp again. And we found that out because, one, it was on the audio. 2, a fingerprint. They had pulled out one of the hand towels and put a dirty finger on it. So that was nice. And actually, we were up the mountain looking for the male the next night with the 4-wheelers. And when we came back, here they had come in again. And that was awesome because they went through everything on the table, didn't disturb anything, and you could hear fingernails clicking and going through different metal and other types of sounds. And then they get to the medic bag and zip and unzip it about 17 times, and then you hear the cooler being closed. What was wonderful about that was when checked, 6, I believe it was 6, monster cappuccinos, appropriately, were taken.
Yeah.
And as to my knowledge, Shane has never found where those cans went. And he's been all over. We found one big handprint under a ledge, which wasn't too far from roadside, actually. And then he's got other data that he would talk about in the future. I don't know how much he's released, but anyway, we're continuing to get more information on this. And feel free to hit me with any questions you like.
Yeah, that's very interesting with the handprints. And I was going to ask you the handprints. You mentioned before that your friend had one on her car window, and then the one on the towel or the rag. Now, did you notice that maybe these had oily residue? Because I hear a lot of like oily residue coming from their fingerprints.
Oily residue on the windows in Idaho, yes. And regarding what we've got on the 400, I'd have to check specifically with those guys. But yeah, that seems to be the case, you know. And I think there's more and more people that have experiences with handprints on their windows of their house or their RV or their vehicle,
siding of the house. Yeah.
And we've got a couple of handprints off the soil, and I know Jeff Meldrum looked at the adult one, and that was good. And you know, we've got a fractional amount of material, yet we have massive amounts of material. But unfortunately, we have people that like to enhance their situation. And that's a problem, because now that makes us put more time into, is it real or is it Memorex? And, you know, so there's concerns there. But we would sure like to have validations on all aspects across the board regarding, you know, what individual did this, or you know, all the subset of questions that go with that.
Okay, I got a question from one of the people in the chat from
Sure.
Steve Riley. He wants to know, does their fingerprint resemble ours?
Well, if you look at, first of all, I can say with confidence that the footprint does not.
Okay.
The digital ridges on the footprint via Jimmy Chilcutt out of Texas back in the day, when those were being carried, when we were comparing, you know, chimpanzee, gorilla, human, and theirs, they're definitely different. And with the handprints, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I haven't even got that far. I've been so heavily involved with behavior and other things. But I would be very surprised if it matched ours.
Okay, and another question from my Goomba Al Santariga, the Squatch Father. He says, have you ever found scat?
I have found some things that we thought may be theirs, but it was undetermined. I've seen photographs from other folks, and I've been to David Bacara's Georgia Museum, and he's got something sent into him from out in the Pacific Northwest that is of significant diameter and significant length. I know that anything over 4 inches in diameter in the east side of the country would be possibly or likely associated with them. That's kind of the differentiating size for grizzly and black bear. Although we do have black bears sometimes that tip the scales of over 800 pounds. That's relatively really rare. Grizzly can make 1,000, but most of the time black bear are 3 inches or less, and the big grizzly, of course, will go 4 inches. But when you start finding scat piles with 4-inch diameter, and you're out of grizzly range, boy, that's certainly something you want to focus on.
And not only that, there's a missing ingredient. There's no berries or kind of like fruit from trees, and it's mostly like solid. You know, from what I was told or what I've heard as well, that it's mostly like a solid, very resemblance to ours. And bears, a lot of bear scat has a lot of berries in it and other ingredients that they get from the woods.
Sure, and you know, depending upon the content and depending upon the health of the individual, digestive system grade or whatever, you can have amorphous or you can have rope coil type feces, and very human-like, yes. And so most people would see a pile and probably just attribute it to a camper in stress.
A camper in stress, or maybe a wild horse came through and just, you know, made a big old oval round swirly pile that is bigger than any human could even possibly, you know, extract from their body.
And then certainly some species would have a place where perhaps they would they would congregate their presence. I'll put it that way. Also, there's an interesting series if you check with some of the literature available, and also you'll pick it up from time to time with private observers. There seems to be an indication that they will actually pick their scat up and remove it from an area. And I know of at least 2 incidences of that.
Really?
I don't have permission to share in a one, but I do know that it happens. And especially with somebody who's had the visual of knowing that that individual is there. So, does the species exist? Does the species complex exist? Certainly. And is it real? Certainly. Do we have all the information? No. Do we have localized information? Yes. And what's going on with sociopolitics of the universities and all the administrations and all the, shall we say, scientific types? Boy, it's a political problem, because when you associate with this subject, it becomes difficulty for many under the guise of having advances in, job pay, and then you have your, how people judge you and things of that nature. So a lot of people like to just sweep this under the rug.
Right. I mean, I know you're talking about like that with advancements, but certain affiliations that are kind of involved in the topic that have, backing from certain universities, they have to stick with a certain mindset agenda on what they think these are, because they don't want to lose funding from that university.
Well, that's exactly part of it. Yes. And there are, I've talked to one afternoon. I was actually preparing to go to Missouri to our on the 400 site, and it turned out that particular week, by Ruth Galdikas, who was the head of the orangutan projects in Sumatra and Borneo, she happened to be visiting in Kansas City, and I was able to talk to her a little bit. And what her amazement wasn't that they were real. Her amazement was that they were in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And that was much fun to exchange with her. And I'm sure Jane Goodall feels quite comfortable that they exist. But the problem, of course, is we don't have a body for science publicly.
Yeah,
so
publicly.
As a result, how can they be real? And some people just are not going to jump that fence until that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you believe that maybe the government has or had one, or is experimenting, or has certain people that go out and maybe bag one and tag one, or capture these and put them in some kind of facility for testing and study?
I don't know about all those aspects, but I can't imagine that an entity with a significant amount of resources would not look at these individual, would not look at this incredible specimen of a giant primate, and we're primates too, by the way. My goodness, what can we learn from this? And when did they release the internet?
Yeah.
And how long did they have it before they released it? So, I'm not in position to comment further on that, except to say I can't imagine that resources haven't been sent that way.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the aspect of, well, why aren't they sharing information? Mm-hmm. We are an interesting species. If we can't handle a spotted owl, and we can't handle cougars east of the Mississippi River very well, how in the world are we going to handle a wild man with possible rights?
Yeah.
And then is it that? Because we seem to have at least 3 phenotypes. A gorilla type. Sibylla has documented and done some incredible illustrations regarding a specimen from Illinois, regarding a specimen from actually Yellowstone Park in Wyoming. And then Alex Evans has done the same with different specimens in Washington. Barb Shoup had an incredible encounter. Her first reaction was, what is that gorilla doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it wasn't a gorilla. And then we have some that look very, very native. A good friend of mine, Angelique Benham, is in a kayak, and she's 8 feet from one, and she comes around a corner. And she's like, oh, my gosh, that man's big. And the sun hits it. She's like, oh, my gosh, it's got silver hair. It's not a man. It stands up, and it looks and turns and walks into the forest. And what she didn't know at the time was, as she kayaked back to the rest of her family, here this big fella is paralleling her up along the bridge, or up along the ridge, looking down. And she may well have seen that particular individual years later in another situation. I've got a man who is very concerned about them, who was in South Dakota at the time. And the one that he looked at was very ape-like. And he was told by the tribal people not to take certain trails and to walk with your head down watching for prairie rattlers, because the last thing we wanted is you to become envenomated. As he walks this trail and he gets out there, he's on the wrong trail. And the reason he didn't want him to go there was because he saw a tree move. And here, as he looks up, this giant steps over to him right beside him, and he looks up and he sees its navel, and he looks up a little more, and there's its nipples, and he looks up and he sees a very unhappy looking face. Of course, by this time he's convinced he's going to die, and its biceps and upper arm are as big around as he is, and he's like 6'3", 180 perhaps, and he yeah, you defecate, you urinate, what else can you do? And he just stood there, and nothing happened. Finally, he turned. He said, for every 3 steps I took, it took 1. And it didn't touch him, didn't say anything. It just paralleled him. And he walked the trail back. And as he got toward the buildings, it went up on the ridge and watched him walk back to the buildings. He suffered tremendously from that. I don't think he went in the woods for how many years, and he never went camping again. So, but that was another gorilla-type looking individual. And then we have, of course, some that look more caveman-like. Dr. Dan Baker in Ohio, and that's what he had described that either he or his wife saw. And then there's numerous other people with that situation. Alex has got a beautiful illustration of one described from Pennsylvania. It's very, very, very Neanderthal looking. And then we have some that, like with Angelique's, her guy was very, very, actually almost Caucasian looking in a sense. But many of them seem to have the features of, or at least allegedly, and they're described as having the features of Native Americans. So it's the phenotypes are incredible. They seem to have every hair color we do and more. And are they cutting their hair? Are they manipulating it? Well, if a gorilla can sign 1,000 words, as some believe, that's not universal thought, are universally accepted. Well, if these have the vocal and anatomical capability to pronounce words, that explains a lot. And if they don't seem to do it, except in certain situations, the universal thoughts are that CR sounds can't be real. But yet, we're getting things that are described as matching that. And in some vocalizations, we're getting things like that. So I know Scott Nelson's busy with one that we picked up off the 400 that we picked up last September. I talked a lot, so go for it.
No, I'm. This is amazing information you're kind of diving into and giving everybody. I mean, I'm very interested in the facts that now I'm going to ask you. Do you think certain features and details and attributes are allocated to different regions of the country? Like maybe the North has the Neanderthal, the South has the more hairy, matty skunk ape, and then the Midwest has the patty style, and then the apish Midwest, and then maybe something the more human would be mid-south or southeast towards the desert.
I would generally agree, but I also have to throw in the fact that, boy, these guys are mobile. And I've got a friend who unfortunately passed away in Florida, and she had seen some of the local big fellas, and they were pretty scrappy looking, long hair, and maybe what's up with the long hair in the South. But that was some of the general descriptions. Here, she saw, and she and her son one day saw, I'm sure it was toward night, one crossed the road, but he looked different. And he looked as though he was bigger and stronger and had much shorter hair, as her report was. And she felt it came from the north. And also she noticed that different type food possibilities were being taken. In other words, nuts from a tree, example. And she gave some others that I'd have to look up. I forget. But anyway, she felt like this was a bigger, dominant individual that probably, I wouldn't say bullied, but I would say dominated some of the locals. Now, whether or not they drove it out or what happened, I don't have any information on that. But I do know that in certain areas, I know Sibylla was said to say that perhaps this individual in Illinois may have been the one that was described from out west. Can they make that journey? Well, we just had a mountain lion that covered the record track, came through Wisconsin, and it ended up in Michigan, and it went over to Connecticut, and it ended up being road killed in those northeastern states. How far to go? 1,600 and almost 50 miles. Wow. Also interesting, it had come out of South Dakota or Nebraska. Nebraska doesn't even hardly verify that they have cougar, but they do. And incidentally, while we're talking about that, I'd like to mention that I just checked in with a buddy of mine, John Stiver, he's one of the wildlife managers throughout the West in Montana, and he's been working with people who need to control predators that go awry and end up taking livestock. So these animals are either are moved to other locations, and then if they come back and continue the bad behavior, then they are destroyed. And I asked him about, okay, so what kind of verifications do you have of cougar putting white-tailed deer in trees? And he said, I can't think of any. And he's been doing this for 40 years. I said, could you do me a favor and could you do a review? Could you just check in with your cougar hunters and your trophy hunters and all the people that you know and can network with on that? And he came back to me in a couple months. He said, Ned, I got two things. I got a small goat that was put 5 feet up in the air on a hay bale, and then I've got a small calf taking up a tree, but not very far. He said, that's all I've got. We have zero verification of a white-tailed deer being put in a tree. And then I said, I thanked him. And then I reviewed what I had. And all I've got is comments from wildlife biologists that will say something along the lines of, well, we don't have any record of it. We've got reports of it, and I wouldn't be surprised. But if you look at the anatomical differences between cougar and jaguar and leopards, those two are big cats with the roars, etc., they have a different jaw structure. And the jaguars, of course, got the biggest, most powerful jaw structure of the whole shebang. And they're bigger cats, usually, although leopards aren't, because I think the max cougars can go about 300 pounds. But I'm having trouble verifying that cougars are putting deer in trees. So that makes it interesting, because that kind of like what's left, people or target species, perhaps.
Something a lot bigger than people, and something that's got the strength to, pick up a deer, a baby calf, anything that's over 100-something pounds, and bring it up a tree with ease, like it's nothing, like it's like you would carry a bag of, like a backpack almost, like that's how light it is for them.
And there you go. Now, like a 300-pound cougar probably has some pretty good power to be able to bring something up, but we don't have a lot of 300-pound cougars. Most of them are in the 150 range or less. There was a steer, 500 pounds from. It's in the literature. You have to dig for it. But one of the biologists in Oregon, perhaps, found this, and he was looking. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is teenagers are having a good time, but there wasn't any trail for it, and there wasn't any damage in the tree. So it's almost as though something just picked it up and put it in the tree branches way up in the air. And there's no real answer for that except for equipment. And there wasn't any equipment sign. And the guy's name was Dr. James Hukins. He had found numerous things, field marks and field traits, that he was very convinced that Sasquatches were real. And he was a full-fledged biologist. Of course, we just lost Dr. John Binnernagle out of Canada. He was a friend of mine, and he was just an amazing man. But again, we need more people like him who will go public, and that's difficult.
Yeah. Well, him, Peter Byrne, and recently Scott Carpenter passed, and R.I.P. to them all, because they were great researchers and innovators into this. Al Santarriga actually said he found a 175-pound buck 60 feet up in a tree. So, I mean, a cougar, I just can't see a cougar doing that. People say they're capable, but I just can't see a 175-pound buck getting dragged up a tree 60 feet.
The question here is, people say they're capable. They're often drawing the conclusion from knowing the jaguar or leopard can do that. We don't have an indication that our cougars can. So the people that are saying that, people could say anything. That's why we got to be a little careful and double check our resources, because Facebook is as much entertainment as it is potentially factual. So
fact checkers and all that BS. But actually, he said he said the tree was pole shaped, like a fireman's pole, and there was no branches on it. So something with superior power it took to get that deer up in that tree. I mean, branches,
definitely. I would personally, I would rule cougar out immediately. You either go to humans or the other option. Speaking of trees, I've got to bring this one up. We were talking about different things. I have a situation where a friend of mine passed away. She had a farm on the Wisconsin River, farm property. And one of her associate teachers at the school she taught at wanted to hunt deer on her property, and she made it available to him. He went, and what really happened was interesting, because as he was there, you have to go through the buildings to get to this spot, and of course the whole place is off. It's no trespassing, and the back side of it's all swamp that leads right to the Wisconsin River, which we consider a corridor and tributary for individuals coming up from Iowa and maybe working their way up into northern Wisconsin and UP and Canada. Right. So and Minnesota, of course, as well. But anyway, he was there all day, nothing. And he perhaps complained a little bit because he had a visual problem, because there was this tree with all these branches. And I asked him about this, and he said he went back the next day and he was terrified. There was a deer laying at the base of his tree, and all of the branches around the tree were broken, 10 to 15 feet up. So he had perfect visibility. Well, not perfect, but he had much greater visibility from that tree stand. And here, this happened. So that was amazing. Now, can we attribute that to a Sasquatch? I don't know that we can, but my goodness, my friend Ruth would have certainly heard engines and equipment back there taking some of these big branches down. So that's an interesting one. I just got through talking with Mike Hartman over in Ohio day before yesterday, and we talked through part of the night about some of his experiences with his deer stand. He'd actually thought his guys were coming over and filling it with brush, and something was continually filling it with brush so that he couldn't use it, or it would take time to get that taken care of. Right. So I mean, we have unusual things happen. We often don't acknowledge them, So
yeah, that's pretty interesting like that. And actually, Al said it looked like its neck was broken when he looked up at the deer. So I mean, obviously, the neck doesn't something half the size of a deer. I don't think it can break the deer's neck while it carries it 60 feet up a tree. That's got to take some brute force to.
Oh yeah.
I mean, exactly. Honestly, people don't know the anatomy of a deer, but the deer's neck is probably one of the strongest parts of their body. Like when they thrash with their necks, especially when they buck, like they fight with their neck. I mean, it probably take four or five humans to hold, to kind of hold it in position and kind of like secure it and like kind of dominate that strength. One person cannot do it alone because their necks are so strong. Like they can thrash and just go crazy.
Well, especially during breeding season with the testosterone,
Exactly. Like I've actually had to take a deer down many years ago when I lived in New Jersey, and it wasn't even a full size. It was like, it was maybe not even a year old deer, and it shed its antlers already. And I had to take it down after I shot it with an arrow. and I had to like, do something else to make it actually go down completely. And I tried to like wrap my arm around its neck and kind of like choke it down to, suffocate it. And it was, fighting back as little as it was, compared to like a full size adult deer. You could feel that strength in the neck. I mean, it was crazy.
Oh yeah. In Wisconsin, we've got 18 people killed by white-tailed deer, non-auto related. So, basically, I think what's happening there is you've got a hunter that thinks he has to slit the throat or something, and then of course the deer just absolutely wails on the guy, and that's what takes him out. Other than that, we have deer crashes with vehicles, of course, all over the United States.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, you have like that last. People don't realize deer have the adrenaline, and like right before they die, they have one last bolt or jolt of adrenaline that pops out of them.
Exactly.
And they have
if you're dealing with antlers or you're dealing with mass, some of these deer are well over 200 pounds. I mean, you get smashed up against a tree, we break easy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And especially, you said, when they're in the rut, when they're in heat,
right?
They have like just ultimate dominant strength and alpha power almost, because they're out seeking a mate and they're using all that energy to go get a mate, and they're not thinking, they're just they're crazy in the rut season. And a lot of people get killed during the rut, and people, especially from bucks, like adult mature male bucks, they will like thrash people with their horns. They can slit your throat. I mean, they can even like pierce you with their antlers, and you're done.
Oh, exactly. No, and talking with people out in I'm invited to go photograph grizzly bear with a friend of mine out in Alberta, Canada. Mm-hmm. Talking to a squasher out in Alberta, I was wondering what her take was on the grizzly. And she said, grizzly, you're going to make you really, you're just going to be totally nerve-wracked with them. Mm-hmm. But she said they're not as bad as the moose, which, of course, is a large deer. And then you've got elk. And it's just amazing how many people survive Yellowstone because of the craziness of walking up to these creatures and having their selfie taken. My neighbor actually flew out to Yellowstone and saw a big buck, and he thought it was great, so we went to do that. He got yelled at and screamed at by the ranger, and he's like, I don't understand that guy. And I said, Mark, would you jump in a pen with a dairy bull? And he looks at me like, are you crazy? That could be murder. Mm-hmm. And I said, what you did was 10 times worse.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And, people don't get it.
Elk and moose, they have, they have 13, 14-point spiked sharp racks on them, and moose have, like a comb almost, and they just shake their head 2 times, and they could pretty much plow through like a line of traffic and clear cars out. That's how strong they are.
Literally, yeah. My friend out in Idaho, she has seen moose knock vehicles around. So they have, it's just amazing the power of these things. Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's amazing that there aren't that there isn't even more mortality from bison and other hoofed mammals out in Yellowstone. And incidentally, in case anybody was wondering, I ended up working as a biologist for Wisconsin. I ended up as an environmental assessment biologist. I am a herpetologist on zoo experience, and also working as a biologist on rattlesnakes and common snappers and commercial turtle take. From that, I ended up doing lyceums and taking animals to schools, colleges, and all kinds of organizations all over the Midwest for over 30 years, and working with exotic animals, working with local things, everything from rattlesnakes and alligators to giant pythons or whatever. And but I never really did Sasquatch stuff because when I did do it, it's like people took me less serious, and all of a sudden I was being judged, and I was actually losing funds and having trouble making ends meet because they would lessen the fees.
Right.
So I just swept everything under the rug and didn't say a thing, and I'm just starting to promote a little bit of speaking. So I'll be in Texas and Missouri and Arkansas and Tennessee this year up until October.
Awesome.
And I've been asked to talk out in Washington next year. So we'll see.
Well, if anybody wants to reach out to you, how can you, like, if they have any questions or if they're interested or then maybe they might be near you? What state are you actually living in right now?
I'm in Wisconsin.
Okay.
I'm stuck in Illinois right now. I've got a little bit of an auto complication, but hopefully we'll resolve that, even if I have to drive 25 miles an hour to 350 miles
Right.
remainder to get back home.
Mhm.
I live on the Minnesota-Iowa border in a little town called La Crosse, about 50,000. I'm from a much smaller town than that, and I frequent the Driftless area from southwestern Wisconsin, and my network is massive. I've got 2 Facebook profiles active right now, and my LinkedIn is probably over 3,000 people, and quite a few just, that you're trying to coordinate with witnesses and enthusiasts, and just networking subject matter to try to pick up more information. And now people, after finding Bigfoot, it's as though everybody's coming out and saying, yeah, I want to play too. Mm-hmm. And that's great because we get more information, but unfortunately we get more hoaxes and we get more, I want to be on the inside in group too. So it just makes more work for trying to find out what's legit and what probably isn't.
Yeah. So once you're part of the club of no return, there's no going back. And some
exactly.
people will.
I take a few photographs too, so if anybody needs any photo tips, I'd be glad to help out. I'm published in over 150 books and magazines. That was mainly Kodachromes, and then when the digitals came out, I didn't have the big digital cameras, but I'm doing pretty good now, and so I can compete. And that's another arena of play that I will be busy with in the near future. I just got back from Hocking Hills Bigfoot Festival. B. Mills puts that on. This is her second year. Done an incredible job. We had massive numbers of people, and I represented Alex Evans' artwork. And she, of course, is she's like a police profile artist who brings the subject to life. Right. And her detail rivals Sibylla's with the ability to just go in and get all the details. Right. And you can see how good these women are by looking at wildlife that they draw. Mm-hmm. And it's just, Alex is amazing with her big cats and her deer and all that, and the percentages of the face and the eye shape and size, and all those details are just wonderful. Sibylla as well. So I just adore these two gals and all the work and effort that they put in to bring what people describe to life. And certainly the accuracies are in question sometimes because of light and distance and memory and all those things. But we're trying to do a good job of giving ourselves a little more information to work with.
Very interesting. I do appreciate you sharing everything with us and giving people, links on how to get a hold of you and all that. And I did enjoy interviewing you tonight. So we're pretty much at your, our hour limit. Yeah, right? We went through an hour already.
Started, man.
I know.
Let's go 40 hours all night and day and do the campfire thing. Dana Nedrelo is my Sasquatch profile. I am a guy. It's Dana, D-A-N-A. That's because Dan A. Nedrelo. I'm not very technically adept at all this, but I can type really fast. So anyway, what's going on is they want to send me a PM or private message there. That'd be great. I'm not going to give my phone number out right now, but if you talk to me and get to know me a little bit, I'll be glad to give it to you. I'm just interested in learning more and doing it respectfully and making sure that people are comfortable. And anything we can all learn together, I'm for. I'm not interested in exposing locations. I'm not interested in going somewhere without permission, and I'm not interested in pissing anybody off. I'd like to be a good, respectable person to share information with. How's that?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I do thank you very much for coming on tonight. So I will get with you in the future. I'm actually going to take a little break from social media right now.
Awesome.
But I will be getting a hold of you, in the future. Sure. So we can probably, connect and do something else. So Thank you very much.
I mean, there's so many parts to this that we didn't talk about. So
yeah, we'll get back to it. We'll do a part 2.
Good. I also have, by the way, a number of different groups online, and one of them I think people should be aware of is Wild Man Literature. Mm-hmm. Just dig through there and try to find it, and if you can't get into it, just let me know. We'll throw you in. I keep it kind of reserved. I don't have to monitor it much. We've got good humans in there. Number 2, I've got Art and Data Sasquatch Witnesses. I haven't spent a lot of time in there lately, but you'll see a lot of Alexa's work and a lot of Sibylla's work in there.
Okay.
Sibylla gives me permission to take her stuff and use it in environmentally educational ways that we can to enhance her work and mine and others that are interested too.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate you sharing everything with me. And I had a really good time interviewing you, so I'm looking forward to next time.
Good. That'd be awesome. I wish you the best, and looking forward to exchanging with you and so many others as we're able.
All right. Well, thanks again, Dan. I appreciate you. Have a good night, sir. I hope you get your car situation going back too as well.
Hopefully. We'll see what happens.
All
Thanks
right.
so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye now. All right, everybody. Well, he is done for the night, and here we are. We're going to be done for, I don't know, taking a little break from podcast and social media and just everything. So I kind of need some personal time to do some things and focus on family right now. So I got some stuff going on. Don't really want to get into too much of it, but I just need a little break right now from all this. And I appreciate all of you, and I do love all my supporters and subscribers. And I'll let you know eventually I will be back, just taking some break right now. And we're going to see you again in the future. So you all have a great night. Have a blessed evening. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you.